Everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the 12 Days of Watercolor Christmas Challenge. I'm so happy to have you here. I see some people popping in to say hello. Okay, our sound is working. All right, so yeah, yesterday was the very first day of the 12 Days of Watercolor Christmas Challenge. So if you need to go back and catch up, that video is available over there on my YouTube channel. Don't forget to grab your printable outlines. So if you're signed up for the challenge, there's also a link in the description. If you're signed up, you will get a workbook of printable outlines. I also recommend to go back to the first day 1 because that's where I chat about my supplies that I recommend using. So go ahead, and if you need to catch up, do that. Either you could do that now or you could do this later. Today we are going to be painting a snowman, and I'm really excited about that one. I won't rehash the supplies. We are just going to go ahead and get started right away today. So it looks like everything is streaming and working okay. If you ever have any troubles, let me know. I'll be watching the chat. All right, so hopefully also my dog seems to be settled in better today. So let's keep our fingers crossed that he is in a good place of just napping during our class. He says he's sorry for interrupting us yesterday. All right, I am going to flip us around and let's get started. Alrighty. Here's our cute snowman here today. I've been enjoying seeing your day 1 paintings over on Instagram. Please keep posting those because you could get a chance to win the grand prize. Sure, I will definitely love to talk about paper. I think that's a great point. So yeah, keep posting your challenge pictures. As of right now, it looks like you'd have an amazing chance to win this challenge. And it is a free entry, lifetime access into my Master Watercolor Dog Breeds course. It's 31 different dogs inside of the course, plus some other modules that discuss how to get started with a pet portrait business. So I am giving that away to one winner who completes the entire challenge, posts all the pictures. You'll be randomly selected at the end. Okay, so we have a question. If you have a second, can you please talk about paper? I feel like I used the wrong side. Okay, that is a great question. So very true that most watercolor papers that I personally know and have used do have what feel like 2 different sides to them. And it'll be trickier to figure out which side you're on based on the type of paper that you're using. For example, I am using the 140-pound cold press paper by Arches. And so let's break this down for a second. The cold press is the amount of tooth. I don't know how clearly we're able to see this here. But yeah, it is the amount of tooth and texture that is on the paper. So this is kind of your medium grade cold presses. They make a hot press, which is a flatter, not quite as much texture to it type of watercolor paper. And then they make a really rough paper. So I use the 140-pound cold press. It has the right amount of tooth to it to me. And what that allows you to do is be able to paint and not feel quite as rushed for your paint to dry. So the wet on wet technique works out really, really well on this type of paper. Hot press just dries a lot faster because it doesn't have as much tooth to try and like work into the paper and absorb it. So on the other side of my watercolor 140-pound cold press paper, it is so much smoother. You could really describe this closer to being a hot press, and I just don't find the quality of a backside of a cold press paper to be as good as truly getting a hot press. So I would still, if you like that type of texture, definitely explore that, but getting a cold press, I think, is a great place to start. It's definitely the most popular in watercolor artists, if you ask me. And then the other thing that I want to note is that the paper that I'm using is very professional paper. And what I mean by that is it's 100% cotton. So the pulp in this paper is all made from cotton fibers. Student grade papers you'll find are a blend. So they're kind of a blend of synthetic materials. I don't exactly know what they put all into the student grade papers, but they just aren't going to give you quite the same result as you would 100% cotton. And that is why I would recommend upgrading to 100% cotton paper when you are doing like a paid commission, or if you're really trying to get more into a business side for your watercolor. That's the type of paper you'll want to use. The student grade for this challenge and just getting to get the right feel of how much paint to water to have on your brushes with different techniques is very helpful. It's very helpful for warming up. So it's definitely worth having a pad. I always have student grade paper on hand as well, but um, I always use the professional stuff when it comes to doing paid commission in portraits. I hope that helps explain the paper side of things. There is like a huge difference. Well, I shouldn't say huge, but in my opinion, I think having the right type of quality paper is going to uplevel your paintings probably more than a brush or paint would. So I think that says a lot when it comes to exploring different paint or different papers. Alrighty, looking good. If you guys have any other questions, I would love to answer them. It's always fun to dive into watercolor talk. I'm just going to grab a scrap piece of paper here. I want to just run through for the body of this snowman. We are going to use a really, really light wash and wet on wet technique to create the shading of this white. So a lot of people have had trouble when it comes to even painting wet, I should say white fur animals. So this is going to kind of dive a little bit into that today. So I just want to show you before we get started what I mean by that. So I am going to, it's hard to show you my water in my paper towel here. I'm going to go ahead and get my brush nice and wet. And what I love to do is use the Payne's Gray. You could also use a blue for this snowman, but usually white objects will reflect some type of blue. They'll reflect a ton of different colors, but for today, we'll just focus more in the blues. So what I'm doing is really diluting. I barely have any paint on my brush, but I have a good amount of water. So I'm just going to get started by grabbing a little bit of that, and I will just apply that to the paper. So this is what our shadow areas that will help create dimension are going to look like. So I don't even have that much paint. It's kind of hard to see because it's reflecting off the light, but I don't have that much paint here. And I would even like to get that lighter. So I'm just going to pick up water and just start to blend that out. But that is going to be what helps create the round sphere of our snowman. So again, I can even mop some of that up. I don't really want too much paint yet. And then before that dries, I'm even going to pick up a little bit more to use that wet on wet technique, and just dropping it down and around the edges down here will start to create that sphere-like object. And what I love so much about this, especially, is that it kind of gives that illusion of ice and snow, which is obviously what we were painting today. So I just want to demonstrate that first before we get started. Don't want you to feel frustrated because I know white objects can be rather frustrating creating dimension. Okie doke, let's go ahead and switch out this demo for our outline here. I hope it's been easy to print them off. You can also trace them, so if you just need to print them off on regular computer paper, just do a graphite rubbing on the other side and put this paper on top of your watercolor paper and just go ahead and trace over it with a pencil. Whoa, I'm just flinging brushes all over the place. I just dabbed a little bit of water here and I just want to quick mop that up before I get started. Okay. I don't see any other questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and do the this cute scarf. I want to paint that first because I want it to dry because I'm going to make it a plaid. So I need the underbase to dry first, and then we'll go back through and then we'll do the plaid with the wet on dry technique. So let's start there. I'm going to use my number 6 pointed round brush today for this part of it. Just gonna get my brush wet, get my red paint activated. I always like to pick the paint up and move it to a well. That way I can kind of see how much paint I have on my brush. If you're gonna pick it up straight from your well, you're gonna get quite a lot of paint on your brush. So this way I can see what I have. And I know I shared yesterday to make it a little bit of a brighter red, I just add a little bit of orange to that. Kind of creates a little more of a dynamic color. Alrighty, so now I have a decent amount of paint and water on my brush. I'm just going to begin by creating the first layer of our scarf. So it's going to be kind of like coloring in the lines. I'll just pick up a little more water to smooth that and make it carry through. We will use that wet on wet technique just in the beginning to help show a little dimension. But a trick here is if you can kind of paint inside of the shapes that you want here. So I painted that shape. It should help to be able to hold the paint in certain areas when you go to drop it in. So this is the beauty of that 140-pound cold press, is I can work in a couple different areas and I can come back to it without it fully drying. But you do have to work a little quickly. So I'll just go ahead and fill in this other one here. And I always want to make sure that you guys have creative freedom with this too, so you don't have to follow my colors that I choose. But if you're looking for just a follow along tutorial, hopefully this gives you some good ideas. There's one little spot over here too. Okay, so pretty basic there. I'm just gonna grab a little more red, a little more paint on my brush, add my orange to that. And this is where I'm gonna drop it in before it dries too far. So I'm just gonna run it right along the edge of where the strap of the, where it's kind of a perpendicular cross of the scarf, just to show a little dimension there. And then I'll do a little bit more on this side. Don't forget, you can always take your clean brush to help smooth it out if you don't like the way that it is drying or expanding. But I always think the point of watercolor is to sometimes just let it do its thing, which was a hard thing for me to do at first. Okay, I'm just gonna grab some more and put it on the left side here because that's overlapping. And I want that top scarf piece to be the lightest. And while it is doing a fun little texture there, I could leave that, or I could take my clean brush that's just dabbed off with my paper towel and run it right along the top here to help soak some of that up, just so I can keep that the lightest piece. So that is my base, and that's all I'll do for right now for that. I'm also going to do that little, the band across the hat in the same red. Oh, I see Lynn is leaving. Sounds great. Yep, the replays will be right here for everybody. So with the pointed tip of my brush, I'm really just going to try and get that same technique of laying in that first bit of red, like so here. It's kind of just that medium amount of paint and water on my brush so I can still control where it's going. And then a little bit on the inside of this buckle. Let's create a little more dimension here because that is a rounded part or a rounded object. So I just picked up a little more paint on my brush. I'm going to drop it in on the right-hand side. And kind of where the buckle starts to overlap there. We can even add it to the left there. So just doing that shows some nice dimension there. If you feel like you lost it, you know, I should mention too that as watercolor dries, it dries lighter than what you originally see it as. So if you need to add more paint to certain areas, you can go ahead and do that. Odds are your painting is starting to dry already, but I'm just going to drop in a little bit more of that red to help make a little more dimension there. And again, on this side. Get rid of that paint on my brush and just help to smooth some of that out. Okay, cute. So next what I want to do is be very careful about letting these areas dry, and so we might as well just start working on another area with a clean brush. I'm just gonna get mine nice and clean here, and let's do these cute little stick arms. Naturally, I'm going to make mine a brown, but I want to start with kind of a lighter brown because that way I can add in some darker colors to it. And to create a lighter watercolor shade is to add more water, less paint. Now, if I wanted to get a darker shade in that, I just need to add more paint to my brush. You can see it's working its way up the scale. There are other ways to create a darker shade in watercolor by adding, I could add some of the Payne's Gray to make it a darker shade. I don't know if I grabbed too much there. Or I could go ahead and wait for this to dry and layer it again with another transparent layer. But just so you can kind of understand, if you're newer to watercolor, adding more water and less paint will create a lighter shade or tint. I don't know if it technically could be called a tint because we're not adding white, but it gives you the idea of what we're doing. So a medium amount of paint to water on my brush right now. I like to spin my brush in the watery paint on my palette. I don't know, it just helps to get it all over in my brush. But we'll just start by doing the fine tip. It's almost like coloring in the lines here. And just start laying in the base layer there. They don't have to be perfect. And again, I'm just working in different sections so that way it kind of holds the paint in certain places. You might need to spin your painting around here to try and not bump it. That's what I'll do here. Okay. So while those cute little arms are still wet, let's grab some more. Or I should say, let's put more paint to less water on our brush. So I have a darker brown I'm working with right here. And I have quite a bit of paint on my brush, so we'll see how this goes. But I'm going to start kind of down where it connects his body. And we're just going to start to paint and drop it into some of these like where it's underneath the overlap or some of the connection points. Can even run a little line down one of the edges. Just enough to create a little bit of dynamic feel to it. And if you want to blend it out again, I'll just take my clean brush and pull that down to help smooth it out. But now we can kind of compare these two arms and how this one looks just way more realistic than the left, even though it's still a kind of a whimsical, lighthearted snowman. Same approach, I might have waited too long. So what I'll do is I'll just add where I want that color, darker color to be. So kind of where these little fingers connect. You can even run right down and along that. And if I wanted to recreate that wet on wet technique, if I was too slow, just pick up a little bit of clean water. And we'll just help it to blend by dabbing a little bit of water in there. How's our lighting going here? Do I need to get a little bit brighter? Let's see. Okay. We are saving the details on top of the white snowman for the end. So let's go ahead and dive into the body. This is where you'll want to make sure you have a really nice clean brush. So just get it nice and wet. Dab it on your paper towel. Make sure you don't see anything there. So I love my Payne's Gray, as I've mentioned plenty of times in the first video. I just love it for creating shadows and dimension, especially for white objects. If you don't have this color, don't worry. You can use a blue and mix a little bit of red in there, even a little bit of a brown to help neutralize that color. Definitely practice if you have a scrap piece of paper, if you're color mixing and you're not going straight from a tube, have a little scrap paper. That always helps. Okay, so we are grabbing mostly water and a very little bit of paint. And what we'll want to do is start where the shadowed area would be the darkest, because that's going to be the safest approach. So that'll be towards the bottom. So I'll just start to outline our little snowman here. I just like to give myself a nice little shape to work with. Then I'll pick up more water. And then I'm just going to continue to work my way up with less and less of that color on my brush. So just picking up water, dropping it in, kind of making sure that it's okay if you go over the buttons. Those are all going to become very dark pieces. So we'll just go right over that. I actually want to leave some white of the paper, so I'm not going to touch this little area. Don't worry if you already did. I'm just going to show you that up close here. So I just left that little bit there. Let's see if I can change the temperature of my lighting. Maybe that'll help. Alrighty. There are these handy lights. It really helps to teach. It's really cool that you can change the temperature of the lighting too. Okay, so while that, I don't know why I keep wanting to say pumpkin. The snowman is still fairly wet on the bottom. I'm gonna go back through and finally grab the tiniest little bit of that Payne's Gray or the blue that you're using, and we're going to drop it in along the bottom again. So don't let this get away from you. We want this to be able to expand. So again, I'm working on the outside, and I even can tell that I need to add some more paint to show a shadow right where the scarf overlays. So we'll just run some right along that edge there. Alrighty. That's all I'll do for the body right now. On the lower half, let's go ahead and do the face. Same idea. A little bit of paint, mostly water on my brush. I'll start kind of right where the face meets the hat because that's going to be the darkest where it's shadowed. It's okay if I go over some of those face details. I'll try and avoid the nose because if you were to layer orange over a blue, just knowing the color wheel, it's not going to layer very nicely. So I'll just have a little water on my brush and pull that out. The biggest, or the part that pops out the farthest is going to be this little area here. So I'm going to leave that mostly white and just bring some of that blue down here. Okay, we might want to add more layers to that at the end, but I don't want to overdo them too much. So now we need to wait for our body area to dry. What I do want to do is create a little cute plaid for our snowman's scarf here. So you can do it with the same brush that if you have a nice pointed round brush, but I'm going to switch to a smaller size one. I want the stripes or the plaid pieces to be a darker red. So I will grab the red, and you could just use a very, very large amount of paint, red paint on your brush, or you can go ahead and grab some type of blue and mix that with your red. I know we discussed that yesterday when we were making our mug, and that's going to create that really pretty burgundy color. You could also just overlay a blue color, and that'll look really nice too. So let's go ahead. I am just going to do one nice swipe down the middle, and then I'm going to do a few that come down to create the plaid. Do my best to stay in the lines here. Might even want to add a little bit kind of right where those edges are just to help create a little dimension. Oh, he's so cute. Let's use that same paint color to do it to our the top part of our scarf here. So I'll do one right down the middle. Let's do some cross ones here. Now I'm only working in this specific section, and we'll do each piece of the scarf on its own. Do another one. And you kind of want to give it kind of a swoop there to show that it's got a little wave and dimension, that it's a piece of fabric. All right, I think I just got to quick mix up a little bit more of that color. Being careful not to touch. Mine looks pretty dry here, so I think I'm okay, but if yours isn't, just be careful not to touch the body. So I'm gonna offset the stripes going horizontally on this other one. So let's start with a stripe up top here. Another one there. And let's do one right here. And if you wanted to use that same paint, you could even just run a little line to help divide those two of the scarf there. Okay, looking cute. Okay, let's switch. I'm going to switch my brush. So I'm leaving those cute final details of the face and the buttons for the end. I'd like to go up and do the hat, which most hats are, top hats are black. So if you have a black in your palette, we can totally do it with that. So let's go ahead and do that. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I'm just going to switch this palette around so you can see. When it comes to doing pet portraits, I rarely ever use a true black out of my palette. It is such a stark color, and it falls flat in portraits especially. So I typically use a mixture of Payne's grays and browns to create those darker colors. But for this example, let's use the black. And it's a very, very dark color, so we want to be careful. I do have a medium amount of paint to water on my brush, but I can still control how much I'm going to apply to the paper so I don't have too much water. I'm just going to use the very tip of my brush and run it right along where the hat meets the face. Be sure that your face is dry, otherwise it'll bleed and run into each other. But I'm starting right there because that is where the darkest part of the hat is going to be. Then I'll just pick up a little bit of water. Might even dab my paper towel just so I can begin to smooth that out just by doing another swipe. Can I add more water to that? And then again. Can even leave like a little bit of white here to help show a little highlight on the very edge of the brim. I kind of like that look, so I'm going to do that. Let's just leave a little bit of a white area there to help separate it from the top part of the hat. So this is what I have right now, but before this dries, I want to add in more of that black right along where it meets the face, because that's going to create a nice faded bloom of where the darkest dark is. All right, looking very cute there. So how many times can I say cute? I realized that I must think this one is just like, I think it would make the cutest little card or something like that. So if you're looking for ideas on how to use your paintings, I think a card would be a really great one for this one. Back to having a decent amount of black paint on my brush, I'm going to head up to the top part of the hat. And because I worked in sections, it should stay. But if you want to go ahead and let that part dry, just to be extra safe, let's just go right above where this buckle is here. I'm just going to do a nice little outline. And then I'll pick up more water. felt like I had too much, so I'm just going to dab it on my paper towel. And we'll just start to blend that in. So the hat is another rounded object. It's going to have quite a bit of a highlight, I would say right around in here. So meaning that I'm going to leave as much light or even white of the paper right there. So even really dark objects are going to reflect some really bright highlights. And that's going to help create the dimension in a severe-like object. So something like that. And if you feel like you had too much paint on your brush, you can always use kind of a drier brush to go back through and mop some up. Just going to grab a little more of that black to help show some edges and add in a little bit more. Can even put some up top there. But I wouldn't add too much of that black. You're welcome to layer it and get some of the dark colors in as much as you want. But I think I'm going to keep mine a little lighter and airier. Just enough to create the idea that it is a rounded object. Alrighty, a little more of this black color to be used. There is going to be a fairly dark area right here, which is right below that buckle area. So I'll use the very tip of my brush. I have a decent amount of black paint on my brush. And then just filling in that gap. Again, I'm just leaving that little bit of a white highlight at the top brim. If you have extra paint on your brush, it wouldn't hurt to layer in another layer. This is how you get watercolor to be darker, is by adding another layer on top of a dry area. So that's just what I did, was one little swipe there. Okay, Jacqueline says I don't have black. So let me just show you quick what you can do if you don't have black. I'm not sure if you want to just let me know what colors you do have available. But one of my favorite ways to create a dark color is to do Payne's Gray, brown. So that is going to lean a little more kind of that dark blue, kind of bluish gray. And then to get that even darker, you can do, I'm just going to add a little more paint to that. That also will help get it a little darker, as you can see there. So I could use that color as is. You can also add a little red to that, and that'll help warm that color up a little bit more. Black is really a good combination of a whole bunch of colors, dark colors all in one. Another thing to add, oops, I just added the red, was to add some blue. So I would do a combination of blue, red, so now you got yourself a purple. And then if you have brown, it's going to really depend. You just want to start to add in a bunch of different colors to create that black. But my recommendation would be sticking within, since we're using more natural colors for our snowman with the sticks and stuff, would be to use some type of brown and blue combination. Okay, I hope that helps. Or you could just go ahead and make his top hat any other color that you would think would be cute. A green one would be cute. And then you could use just kind of a lighter wash of a different color. for the buttons. I'm grabbing the black color again. We're just going to finish up some of these finer details, and we are almost done with today's. So when it comes to doing the coal, I'll just, again, outline the outer edges of these little coal pieces. Then I'm going to get rid of all the paint on my brush. And then with a little bit of water, just kind of smooth them in like that, just so they're not one big flat black piece of coal. But for the tiny little details in the face, that one I'll just go ahead and make some little dots. So we'll do our cute little eyes here. Let's see, what if we wanted to give them rosy cheeks? Now I'm going to back up for a second. If I wanted to give them rosy cheeks, which is not realistic, but cute. So we are going to pick up just the slightest amount of red, so mostly water, a little bit of paint, and I'm just gonna do a cute little dab on each side. So while that dries, we'll do his nose. And naturally it'll be orange, but instead of using it straight from the tube, which I'm sure a lot of your orange color looks like this straight from the tube, I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow ochre to mine, but add any little bit of yellow that you have, and that's gonna help give it a little more of a kind of a lighter orange tangerine color. So let's go ahead and just lay that one all in there. And then if I got rid of all that paint on my brush, I might just go through and scrape up some of that color up top there. Okay, Judy, you had a great suggestion. So to make a nice blacks by mixing your 3 primary colors, red, blue, and yellow. Definitely give that one a try. Thanks, Judy. I'm all about adding dimension to this, so I'm just going to add a little bit of that orange paint back in underneath. Okay, getting rid of all that orange paint off my brush. I don't want too much water. Just want to pick up some of that black paint so I can really control it. And making sure my little cheeks are dry. Not so sure they are. So I'll wait to do those buttons that go right above or right on top of it. So I'm just using the very fine tip of my brush. And then taking a little bit of a risk there, but I'm going to drop them on top of our rosy cheeks. Alrighty. Okay, I love it. I think it's simple, but could be turned into, like I mentioned, a really pretty card, or even just a nice simple white background like this would look so pretty in a frame. What you could do if you're looking for more painting time is create a really pretty snowy background. And I would totally have fun with that by doing the wet on wet technique. So once you did a whole misty, like I would do it as a lighter bluish background, and then you can go back through and drop in darker colors. So let's just see if we can do a quick little example. So if we were to do a pretty light wash of a background, it's kind of like painting a sky like this, leaving some areas to have more blue. I would do something similar to this And then as that dries a little bit more, you could go back through with the blue and with the very fine tip of your brush, do a really cute. Okay, I need to stop saying cute, but you know what I mean. Just do some little dabs like this, and I think that would be a really fun snowy effect for the background of your painting. And if you do that, I can't wait to see. Be sure to tag me in your paintings at Windswept Design Studio. If you are not able to use Instagram, please send me an email with your submission because I am keeping an album of all the entries. So either way, post it on Instagram or send me a direct message or a email. And if you have any questions, of course, I would love to answer them. So don't be afraid to send me a message or an email as we continue our challenge. Alrighty, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed day 2. If you couldn't paint today or right now, I hope you find some time this weekend to paint. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday. And I will see you tomorrow back here at noon. Have a wonderful day.